Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Tapped In Sales, your Christmas episode, your podcast for beer distributors by beer distributors. I am your moderator and host, Bud. Here, what you are about to listen to today is a special recording with Logan Edwards from Grellner Sales and Service down in Missouri. We did this as a prep recording before the MBWA Next Gen Conference. So if you're listening to this is our special holiday episode. We'll be back again next week. Everybody have a very Merry Christmas and cheers.
This is the Tapped In Podcast, the podcast for beverage distributors that want to empower their sales team to drive business results. Well, listen up and welcome to a special recording of the Tapped In Sales Podcast with Logan Edwards from Grellner Sales and Service. Logan, my man, thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here, bud.
And you are here, or we are here today because we wanted to go through and record kind of what you're going to talk about at the Next Gen Summit in Kansas City. And if you're watching this, it's because somebody was at the Next Gen conference, leadership conference for MBWA, and was like, hey, Logan said something was so genius, you need to listen to this. And that's why it's been shared with you back at your office more than likely. I'm sorry, but you're stuck talking with us two knuckleheads as we kind of go through what Logan talked about. So, a little bit about Logan and Grellner Sales and Service, established in 1941 in central Missouri's go-to. You're like the Lake of the Ozark land, right, Logan?
Yep, that's a big part of our territory.
I love it. Tell the people a little bit about the business and yourself, my man.
So, like I said, we started as a trucking company back in 1940. We started up around Rich Fountain, Missouri, kind of south of Jefferson City. We kind of started in more agriculture trucking, where we were hauling a lot of hogs, and actually my great-grandfather was looking for backfills. So the Edelweiss beer brands were basically offered to him they were looking for a distributor in central Missouri. He was looking for backhauls, so it just made sense that, he become a beer distributor in central Missouri. So I know it sounds kind of gross, but they would literally haul the hog trucks in, dump the hogs, spray out the trailers, go to the brewery, pick up the beer, haul it back, and sell it in central Missouri. So basically back then we kind of had the Jefferson City, Columbia area of the state, so then a few years later, my grandfather decided to sell that part of the business. My grandfather, Bob Edwards, at the time, the Vietnam War was going on, and Fort Leonard Wood was a big training center, and Pabst was another brand that my grandfather had attracted. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri was hot and heavy through the Vietnam War, and they were looking for a Pabst distributor in that area. So my grandfather decided to move down to Rolla, and we became a Pabst distributor down there. Fast forward to today, we're running 4 locations across central Missouri. 2 with inventory, 2 that are cross-docked. So part of the challenge for us with very rural territory, a lot of miles, 4 different branches, how do you get everyone all together, and how do you make a sales plan that, Sedalia looks a lot more like Kansas City, Rolla looks a lot more like St. Louis, 2 decent-sized universities, a lot of seasonal areas, floating the lake, and things like that. So how do you make everybody happy with structuring sales incentives? So that's kind of a little bit about us.
That's awesome. All good stuff. And like hogs and beer, it's logistics, right? We got to move stuff around. So good stuff. So Logan, we wanted to hit people with a couple questions to kind of break the ice. I think for you, when you were looking at making these changes, what were one of the big things that kind of jumping off point that you had as inspiration that you might want to propose to the audience around, hey, who's happy with their comp structure right now, right?
Yeah, just show of hands. Who's really happy with the way they're going to market right now and their current sales plan? I know there were several years when I've gotten into, upper middle management where I honestly just wanted to pull my hair out with what we were currently doing. So anybody in the room feel the same way?
I can only imagine that most people are just like you and me. They're like, hey, it's not working. We got to make a change. The business is tough. It's been harder than it ever has been, and we need to think differently to get different results, right? So when you were making the jumping off point, what was your response to that question? Because you had this exact same question and conversation internally in your operation with your dad and with your sales manager, the Rod father being dad and Randy being your sales manager. How'd that conversation go? What did you guys uncover on as challenges?
Well, I think the biggest challenge was, when you get to 50, 60 suppliers, Randy, our sales manager, just like many people in his position, he's the internal optimist. I may be the more of a pessimist, but, when you've got a sales plan that's 12 or 13 pages long, and you're having these afternoon meetings, and sales guys are having a few beers, and by 20 minutes, 30 minutes into the meeting, nobody's paying attention to what the hell anybody's saying, and you talk to your sales guy, and they really don't understand how they're getting paid. Okay, I get paid on this, but I don't get paid on that, and sales aren't growing, and you got a problem.
Do got a problem. A lot of opportunities, right?
A lot of opportunities.
But what did the transformation look like? You took about an 18-month transformation, went over 3 different phases. Kind of give people a high-level overview of what you were started with the transformation, then we'll kind of go through, get your jumping off point, and then we'll kind of go through the 3 different iterations and kind of model out what transformations can look like for the audience.
So initially, we had a base. Originally, how our sales structure was set up is we were base plus commission, and then we had up to 12 what we called MBOs, or monthly business objectives, and then we had incentives we would run up on top of that. So it was very complex. Randy, basically our sales and marketing manager, was spending basically all of his time in the office writing incentives, scoring incentives, really not getting any time in the market. And I think as a sales leader, if you're not spending time in the market, you're losing touch with your sales staff and what's going on and actually feet on the street. So our first phase in iteration with VXP was we moved from a sales, basically a sales structure like that, to a growth and profit, volume growth and profit model. Now, initially in phase 1, what we did is we kept bases, but we moved a significant portion of that commission into VXP, which is the volume times profit. And then we went from 12 MBOs to 5 MBOs. Then we had incentives on top of that. And, what we found is initially we found really good results, but I think what we were lacking was a little bit of focus from our top suppliers. We still had a little bit of creep from some of the smaller suppliers, and some of the MBOs, it might be like we were doing like 5 10 case displays of Miller Lite and Coors Light. Well, the guys already have these in the market anyway, so why are we paying people for basically turning in the same display month in and month out? And we kind of felt like the sales staff we were growing GP, but really they didn't, with a portfolio the size of ours, they kind of had a loss of focus.
And that really led you to phase number 2. And okay, we basically went to what I loved about phase number 1, to go back to that. We really wanted to move to accountability over entitlement. You and Rodney were able to see really early on, like, business is going to turn and get tough. We are giving people raises. Another term that I heard is we're giving people raises for just selling more valuable product through price increases. We're not actually getting them to sell more profitable product to drive more money to the bottom line. And that was roll around entitlement and account versus accountability. And that's one of the big things you got out of phase 1. Phase 2, moving into that, where you're talking about, is like, we still got suppliers in the mix. How do we have control? And we'd really want to get a little bit of some co-opting of the incentive structure back from the suppliers too. Talk a little bit about that first phase 2 and that transition of, okay, we want to try to bring suppliers back into this, but in a little bit more organized fashion. And maybe the first phase of that, or in phase 2, didn't land perfectly the first go around.
Yeah. So, I think phase 2, we recognized this was probably, I don't know, I'd say 9 months in. After we had been in VXP for 9 months, it's like, okay, we've gotten here. What's going to take us to the next level? And I think what we realized, what we wanted to do with phase 2 was we took our 7 largest suppliers. And as many of you know, your suppliers give you volume goals. Normally you discuss these in ABP. Most of the time you feel pretty comfortable with them. So what we did is we basically took our top 7 suppliers and what supplier isn't going to pay and co-op if you're hitting their volume goals. So what we were able to do through VXP is we laid out objectives that get tracked monthly. So basically when a rep gets within 10% of hitting that supplier goal, they get, I'll just use one goal, for example, say Boston Beer. If they hit that number, it's worth $100 for the month. Once they get to 90% of that goal, they get $10. Once they get to, 91% of that goal, they get $20. But it works on a scale. So they are getting rewarded the closer they get to that goal, and they have the ability to make $25. We don't want them to stop if they're having a good month, blow that goal out. So there is a kicker at the end of that goal. So really that was phase 2.
Awesome. Good stuff. And then so that was phase 2. And then moving on to phase 3, this was more about trying to drive incentives to more focus, where you really did trim this down to the top 6 or 7 priorities of the month being supplier partners.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you really kind of started with you started leaning in on phase 2. But then you did something other really interesting around changing the mindset around your smallest suppliers. What did you do with your smallest suppliers there?
So really with our smaller suppliers, and one thing we also got rid of in phase 3 is we were still doing 5 what we called monthly business objectives. I'm going to be honest, I hated monthly business objectives I've hated them from day one. I've always wanted to cut the cord, get away from those. And so part of phase 3 was we said, we're not going to have 5 mandated objectives anymore that the guys will get paid on. Everything's going to be either driven towards their supplier volume goal or it's going to be incentive based. And really the incentive based, I feel like, is what's worked the best, to where we have, large suppliers, small suppliers, they come to us with these national incentives. A lot of your smaller suppliers, we've kind of done away with a lot of the 50-50 co-op and stuff like that. If you're a smaller supplier in our house, I'm not saying we know that we won't run an incentive for you, but it has to make sense within our structure, and it needs to make sense to where it does make sense for us to 50-50 if it's going to benefit and drive gross profit. I'll give you an example of a good 50-50 we did with a local brewer, Piney River, which they make great beer. They won several GABF medals. What do you do when you have about a 10,000 case craft brand that doesn't belong everywhere? You can run distribution incentives and people can go stick it in places where it doesn't need to be and create a bunch of old beer. What we did is we ran an incentive. This is 50-50 co-op. The guys get a quarter per case for every case of Piney River they sell. Pretty easy incentive. And believe it or not, we've had 2 years of growth since we started running that specific incentive. So where it makes sense, the guys kind of lead towards pushing that local brand, but yet you're not going and paying for distribution that may or may not change the game. And then, for a lot of our larger suppliers like Boston, Diageo, Molson Coors, they run a lot of national incentives that are great incentives that they're going to fund 100%. So, what we were doing back in the day is we might run an incentive that they're already incentivizing. So why would we double, the guys were getting a little bit of double dip. Really, we've really cut back on some of the incentives that we have ran, and we've been more deliberate about what incentives we are going to put in plan. And, I think it's led to more success. It's led to more focus. Molson Coors, everybody who's a Molson Coors or a Constellation distributor, they know that you have, first quarter and then basically 2 distribution periods. And we've been very successful in closing those distribution periods early, even ahead of most of our peers, just because we've put more focus on made less noise and clutter in the sales plan and put more focus on where it matters. And then also, I feel like what it's also allowed us to do is we've gotten more into spirits. And, the thing about VXP, when your volume times profit, the sales guys want to sell what's going to make money, and they see the high GP per CE on a spirits brand or a Delta 9 that, really we don't even have to run incentives on these. We just let them know the GP per CE, give them some samples, and, put it in front of them, and they're excited to go sell it because that's an area that's we weren't currently in that we can go and take share.
You gotta love it. You gotta love that kind of focus. Now, some of those key outcomes that you've talked about is, what were some of the bottom line results you've gotten out of moving in this direction and having a more profit centric and through the 3 phases? Where do you feel like, and what are some quantitative and qualitative results that you've gotten out of it with the team and with the organization?
Well, it's always tough when you roll out a new system with salespeople. They always think you're out to screw them. But believe it or not, in year 1, all of our salespeople actually made more money the VXP way than they did the old commission way. And the first year we rolled out VXP, we were actually down a little bit in dollars. So they would have lost commission, as to where VXP, we were able to drive more gross profit. So the fact that we were down in gross sales, but we had grown our margin, we actually were able to offset some volume declines and have a much better year than what we would have had. So I think right now, as it stands, over the last 18 months, our gross profit per case is up about 50 cents per case. And that's with minimal price increases. I mean, if you look at Missouri, I've had several ADPs. Just beer in general is off. I mean, total beer, kind of data. In Missouri has been off, 5%. I think we were the second worst state from what I've seen in the Midwest. And I really feel like this mindset has allowed us to offset some of those declines in beer. Now, it has also helped that, we're also a KDP distributor in a large part of our market, and they've made some good moves. I mean, they're trying to premiumize, their portfolio as well with acquisitions like C4 and Ghost. And the guys see the value in those, and really you don't have to do a whole lot with them. Just go sell them.
Gotta love it. That's awesome. Now, you also did something really interesting where you've got Miranda on your admin team that used to be just a sign shop person who was kind of managing and leading the sign shop effort, who's now really taken over some of the analytical work, and you haven't added any new labor related to managing these shifts and changes too. You simplified not just the front end for the reps, but also for the back office operations too.
Yeah, it's taken a little time, but really it's been great. So just to kind of give you a background, Miranda, great single mom, started working for us out in the warehouse and made her way into the sign shop. And the way VXP tracks things, what we've been able to do is Randy, our marketing manager, who used to spend all this time creating reports, scoring all these incentives, has really been able to work with Miranda as his admin. And we've gotten to where she is loading all the incentives into VXP that we come up with and really do all the tracking and scoring, as well as keep up with her part-time sign shop duty. And then what it's also allowed us to do is it's made us more efficient on our bill backs. So she is also now taken on the responsibility of doing our supplier bill backs for all these incentives. And so not only is it freeing Randy up to spend more time out in the market where he's very effective, but also it's made our bill back process much simpler. It's a lot, we're seeing payment from suppliers on incentives and things like that come back faster, which, before we would do a lot of that bill back quarterly, but this has allowed us to do the bill backs monthly, which means instead of the sales guys sitting around waiting for an incentive to get paid back that they did 6 months ago, and we're just now paying, now they're seeing payment on these incentives come back monthly, which, everybody knows with salespeople, the more instant gratification you can give them, the more they're going to want to push and drive more business.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome stuff. So this matters to folks because you were able to move from like a legacy comp. I love that you talked about how you hate MBOs. You and I have always been aligned to that.
Yeah.
Like we need to drive things that are constantly driving the business forward, not activities for activity's sake. Less waste, clear ownership, but also like, how did your suppliers feel about all of this? This is a big question that, distributors probably have on a regular basis. If I'm going to take more ownership and have more autonomy to my reps, how are suppliers going to actually drive these results or feel about these changes internally? What has that experience been for you?
They've loved it. I mean, the fact that, I think if you look at Molson Coors, they're trying to premiumize their business. Everybody knows what Constellation's doing. The fact that we can show them where their dollars are being spent, and that they're not wasting dollars, that we're strategically aligned with hitting their top line goals, and that we're taking the time and effort to help grow their business and investing as a supplier partner. I think we've had some great results with it.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome stuff, brother. So any big key takeaways you want to touch base on before we kind of finish up today's recording, and we'll see everybody out in a couple weeks in Next Gen?
So I just say the clear takeaways is, don't be afraid to, look at different technology and different things. This is focused on sales, and we took the VXP route, and I think it's been very, very helpful for us. But I would say, kind of as a guy in Next Gen who's looking to make our business more efficient as costs continue to drive, don't be afraid to look at things through a different lens, and know that there are other, whether it be making your warehouse more efficient, making your routes run more efficient. Don't be afraid to look at, some of these things that may be problems in your business, and you don't always have to do things the way you've always done things. And, that their MBWA out in Vegas last month, there was a lot of great vendors and a lot of great seminars and things like that will help, can help make your business more profitable. So don't be afraid to go out there and mix things up.
Well, Logan, thanks for joining us today, going through this, and thanks for sharing all your brilliance at the MBWA Next Gen Conference. If you want to reach out and hunt Logan down, Logan, how should people come find you if they're watching this recording?
You can email me at Logan Edwards, LOGANEDWARDS @grellnersales.com, or I'm sure I'll be out having beers in a hotel lobby or somewhere during MBWA. If you have any questions, don't feel free to look me up. Be happy to
Love
talk.
it. You can also hit up us, VXP, info@vxptech.com. That's VXPTECH.com. I can help connect you with Logan as well, too. So, Logan, you're the man. Thanks for joining us today. Man, we're going to be in together in no time having a beer. So,
yep, looking forward to that.
You rock, big guy.
So, awesome. It's been good.